I gave my daughter $81,000 after selling the last piece of land my husband left me. She said she needed it to fix the roof and remodel the kitchen. 3 days later, she handed me a rent bill. $1,650. She said it covered my share of groceries, Wi-Fi, and utilities. Then she showed me the basement room where I'd be staying. That moment stayed with me. I thought I was helping her build a home. I had paid for my own disappearance. I walked into the kitchen just as the late morning sun pushed through the blinds. The light cut across the tile floor in soft lines, and for a second, I paused to feel that warmth. Madison had just slipped into spring, the kind that smelled like damp bark and thawed soil, the kind that made you believe healing was still possible. Mallory had left an envelope on the counter. I thought it might be a card, maybe a thank you note. I had just handed her $81,000 3 days ago. That money came from the sale of the last piece of land my husband had left me in Sauk City. We had held on to it for decades, thinking one day it might be a place to retire. But Mallory said the kitchen needed a full gut renovation, and the roof was leaking. Her voice had cracked when she told me, so I told her yes. Of course I told her yes. I opened the envelope. It was a bill. $600 for groceries, $300 for internet and Wi-Fi, $750 for electricity, water, and gas. $1,650. Due next Friday. In the corner, her handwriting. Mum's March share. I stood there with the paper in my hand, like it was something foreign, like I couldn't read anymore. My daughter charged me rent. A small sound came from behind, her heels on the wood floor. "Oh, good, you saw it," she said. "It's just to keep everything fair. You know how utilities are now." I said nothing. I just nodded and smiled like it was normal, like it didn't crush me somewhere quiet inside. She had already turned away, pouring herself coffee from the French press. I noticed she had new mugs, hand-thrown pottery, the kind that cost $40 apiece. The kitchen was already halfway remodeled, stainless steel range, subway tile backsplash, brass handles, soft close drawers. She talked about the plumber coming later that afternoon, and whether she should go with matte black or brushed nickel for the light fixtures. I stood by the counter, still holding the bill. Then she said, "I figured you'd want privacy, so we started fixing up the basement." I blinked. Mallory kept talking. She said it would be nice and quiet down there, that she would help me set it up just like I wanted. She mentioned a fold-out couch, a small fridge, even a smart speaker so I could play music or listen to those history podcasts I liked. I followed her down the stairs. The carpet was new, so were the blinds, but the air was damp, and the walls were still concrete behind the paint. There was no window, and no door at the top of the stairs, just an open gap. It felt like storage. No, less than that. It felt temporary, like I didn't belong anywhere else. I looked around and nodded, again, because that's what you do when you've already said yes too many times. You nod. She smiled, called it cozy. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the narrow pullout. My suitcase was still zipped beside me. I hadn't unpacked. The house was quiet above me. I heard footsteps now and then, cabinets closing, the sound of Mallory laughing at something on the television, a life going on upstairs. I pressed my hands to my lap and stared at the bare wall. I thought about the check, about the years my husband and I spent saving, about the patch of land that held every dream we had when we were young. I sold it in a single afternoon, because Mallory said she needed help. She had always needed help, and I had always given it. But that night, as I sat alone in a windowless room I paid for, I realized something different, something uncomfortable. Maybe it wasn't her fault for taking. Maybe it was mine for never stopping. If you've ever felt that slow ache of realizing your love was being counted like money, stay with me. This story isn't done yet. The next morning, I woke early. Too early. The kind of early that feels hollow. I stared at the low ceiling for a long while before finally sitting up. The air in the basement was heavy, unmoving. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stepped barefoot onto the cold floor. There was a space heater in the corner, but the switch sparked when I tried to turn it on, so I left it alone. I padded up the stairs, careful not to make noise. I didn't want Mallory to think I was restless, or worse, ungrateful. In the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee greeted me. She had already brewed a pot. The counter was clean, and the backsplash caught the morning light in its glossy tiles. I poured myself a cup and sat at the far end of the kitchen table, where I used to help Mallory with schoolwork 2 decades ago. She always liked to sit in the same chair. She said it made her feel like she was in charge. When she came in, she looked surprised to see me. Her makeup was done. She had on a soft pink blouse, and her hair curled under at the ends. She looked like the version of herself she posted online. Polished, in control. She opened the fridge and pulled out her lunch container. Hummus, carrot sticks, some kind of mason jar salad with quinoa. Then she asked if I had gotten settled. I said yes. I lied. She reminded me the plumber was coming again and asked if I could be around to sign the invoice. I nodded. She kissed my forehead and left with a quick wave. The door closed and the silence came down like a curtain. That day I stayed upstairs. I moved quietly, not touching anything that looked new. I folded the dish towel more neatly. I stacked the mail by the door. I watered the plants, even the fake one by the TV. I knew she'd notice if something looked out of place. Around noon, I made myself a sandwich and stood at the window, watching the mail truck roll by. The driver didn't stop. He rarely did these days. The only letters I got were digital now. The real mailbox belonged to Mallory. By 3, the plumber still hadn't come. I sat on the couch and scrolled through my phone. A woman I used to volunteer with had posted a photo of the community garden. They'd added new benches. Someone had repainted the sign I helped design 10 years ago. It made me smile, then ache. I spent 32 years working in public health, coordinating workshops, managing wellness programs, helping people through hard seasons. I used to give lectures about the importance of safe spaces for seniors. Now here I was, downstairs with a lockless door and stale air. By 4:30, the plumber arrived. He was polite, asked me where the access panel was, and I showed him. He said the new pipes looked good, that the main shutoff was solid. He handed me a clipboard, and I signed. $675. Another invoice paid, likely from what I gave her. I thanked him and watched him leave. That evening, Mallory came home tired. She didn't ask much, just whether he came and if he seemed competent. I gave her the receipt. She nodded, said she'd scan it later. Then she said she had plans and left again. I stood in the kitchen alone. I should have gone back downstairs. I should have accepted the quiet and the chill, but I didn't. I stood there, fingers resting on the countertop, and looked around the room I helped build. I noticed the new pendant lights. They were brass with frosted glass, elegant in a way Mallory had never been before. The dining table was different too. Solid wood, sleek lines. A small vase with fresh eucalyptus sat in the center. It felt like someone else's house. I walked through the hallway and peeked into the room that used to be the guest room. It had been turned into her office. Everything was color-coordinated, soft grey, dusty blue. Her diploma framed and hung above the desk. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just a visitor. I had become invisible. No photos of us on the wall. No trace of my life in this place. Except for the check I signed. I went back downstairs, not out of choice, but because I didn't want to leave fingerprints on her world. And in the stillness of that basement room, I sat on the edge of the fold-out couch again, hands on my lap, and whispered to myself what I hadn't dared admit out loud. I was no longer part of her life. I was part of her budget. 3 days after the plumber came, Mallory replaced the open stairwell with a sliding barn door. She said it would help with privacy and keep the heat in. It was grey, just like the rest of the house. Minimalist, smooth, no handle on the inside. It clicked when it shut. That night, I lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how silence sounded different with a door. Not quieter, just lonelier. The mornings blended. I would rise early, listen for movement upstairs, wait for the coffee machine to finish sputtering, then climb the steps. Some days, Mallory greeted me. Other days she nodded from behind her laptop. She had taken to working from home twice a week. On those days, I stayed out of the kitchen and spent most of my time folding laundry, reorganizing the closet downstairs, or watching old lectures from the community wellness program I used to lead. She never mentioned the check again. She also didn't ask about my health, or whether I needed anything. Not that I expected her to. But I had once imagined something else. Something warmer. One afternoon, while she was on a video call, I stepped into the backyard. The air was crisp, the grass still patchy with spring frost. I looked at the flower beds I helped her build 6 years ago. They were overgrown now, weeds curling between the stones. A tomato cage bent to one side. The wind nudged it gently. I bent down, pulled a few weeds. My knees cracked as I moved, but I didn't mind. It felt good to do something useful, even if no one noticed. From inside, her voice rose. She was talking about leadership training, something about retention rates and behavioral analysis. Then a pause, and laughter. Not the kind I remembered from her childhood, when she would giggle at cartoons or run through the sprinkler. This was a clipped laugh. Controlled. Strategic. I stood up slowly and walked back inside, brushing dirt off my hands. That evening, Mallory handed me a new invoice. She said, "Just utilities this time. The food part is rolled into the grocery app now." The amount was $1,400. I looked at the paper. She had typed it out this time. Neatly formatted, with a table of items. Wi-Fi, gas, electric, water, waste management. She added a note at the bottom. Payment preferred via Venmo. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, thinking about the money I had left. Not just in my account, but in my life. Time, too. Energy. How much of it I had poured into her since she was born. She was a difficult baby. Allergies, colic, sleep regression. But I never once let myself fall apart. I held her through it all. When she was bullied in 6th grade, I met with every teacher. When she didn't get into her first choice college, I helped her reapply. I taught her how to drive, how to cook rice without burning it, how to keep her hands still during hard conversations. And here I was, in her basement, paying for heat I didn't feel. The next morning I took a walk to the local post office. It was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and an ice cream shop that had closed for winter. I hadn't been in that part of town in months. The woman behind the counter recognized me. She said, "You used to lead the walking group here." I smiled, said yes. She told me they missed it, that no one had picked it back up after the pandemic. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I stepped outside, turned left instead of right, and walked toward the lake. Lake Wingra was still, except for the ducks in the shallow end. A few older men stood with fishing poles. I sat on a bench, pulled my coat tighter, and let the cold bite through a little. It was then I made a decision. I didn't belong in a basement. Later that afternoon, I returned to the house, printed the utility bill, and circled each line item. I wrote the word paid in red across the top, left it on the counter, and walked downstairs. I packed my suitcase slowly. There wasn't much to take. A few sweaters, some books, a framed photo of my late husband from our wedding day. I didn't bring the mug Mallory gave me last Christmas. It had chipped. I waited until Mallory was on another call, then wheeled my suitcase up the stairs. She didn't look up. I opened the barn door, stepped into the kitchen, placed my keys on the counter, and walked out the front door without a sound. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. She knew I was done pretending. The door clicked behind me, soft but final. The air outside felt sharper than before, but it also felt real. I walked 4 blocks to a small rental office I passed every week on my old walking route. The woman inside was kind. Her name was Cynthia. She showed me a listing for a modest apartment overlooking the lake. 1 bedroom, ground floor, a wide window in the living room. She said I could move in the following week. I said I'd take it. Paid the deposit in full. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly that night. Not because I had a new home, but because I had finally closed a door that had stayed half open for far too long. The apartment was nothing like the house. It smelled of fresh paint and stillness. Not silence, but stillness. The kind that comes after you've taken a breath too deep and have nothing left to exhale. I stood in the middle of that empty space with a single suitcase and a bag of groceries that I had no appetite for. It was only 560 square feet. A studio, really. The kitchen was a corner, the bed folded into the wall, and the lake shimmered just outside a small balcony. I could see geese nesting near the reeds, drifting along like they had all the time in the world. I didn't unpack right away. I didn't even sit down. I just walked to the window and watched the water for a long while, letting the rhythm of it push back the ache in my chest. The ache of walking away from a house I paid for, a daughter I raised, a life I had folded around someone who clearly didn't want me anymore. There was no message from Mallory, no call, no email, nothing. I suppose she assumed I would come back, or that I would realize how dramatic I'd been. But I hadn't been dramatic. I had been quiet, too quiet, for too long. The next morning, I went out early, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I couldn't stand the thought of sitting still. I walked along the lake path in a hoodie and sneakers, feeling the chill in my knees. At the far end of the trail, I saw an old wooden sign, Community Wellness Center. The building looked tired but cared for. Fresh flowers in pots flanked the door. I peeked inside and saw a group of women around a table, folding towels, passing tea. Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped in. A woman in her 60s, with soft silver curls and reading glasses, looked up and smiled. "Just in time," she said. "We're short 1 pair of hands." I nodded and sat down. They didn't ask who I was or where I came from. They just handed me a stack of towels and welcomed me like I'd always been there. Her name was Olive, retired nurse. She ran the Wednesday morning senior support circle, something between a potluck and a quiet rebellion against loneliness. For the next hour, I listened to women talk about their sons, their knees, their dreams of taking up piano again. One of them had just lost her cat. Another had been ghosted by her grandson after paying for his spring break. I didn't speak much, just nodded, and let their voices fill the silence that used to belong to my daughter. When it was time to go, Olive touched my arm. "We meet every Wednesday," she said. "You don't have to talk, but we'd like you to come." I said thank you, then walked home with a sense of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of something not bitter. Later that afternoon, I went to the grocery store. I bought too many apples. I bought a plant, a small, foolish little plant I didn't need but wanted. And as I stood in line at the checkout, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Cynthia, my former colleague at the Department of Health. We hadn't seen each other in almost 2 years. "Lucinda," she said, "you disappeared." I told her I'd retired, that I'd moved. She looked at me carefully, then said, "You know we're relaunching the Lakeside Initiative. They're desperate for someone with field experience. I could put in your name." I laughed a little, waved it off. But later, back in the apartment, I looked at the plant on my windowsill and thought about how strange it felt to be needed again. Not by family, but by the world. By something bigger than just one kitchen, one basement, one failed relationship. That night, I cooked for one. I sliced the apples too thin. I burned the edges of my toast. And still, it was the best meal I'd had in weeks. I sat with my plate in my lap, legs folded under me, watching the lake ripple gold in the last light. Mallory hadn't called. I didn't expect her to. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to grow into it. I had been at the lake apartment for nearly 2 weeks when the message arrived. It wasn't from Mallory. It was from Cynthia. Her email was short, to the point. They had an opening for a program coordinator at the Wellness Outreach Program. Part-time, flexible hours, remote available. She said they needed someone grounded, someone who had seen things fall apart and still knew how to build. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Not because I didn't want it, but because I hadn't realized how much I missed having somewhere to go. Somewhere I mattered. I accepted. The next Monday, I started working from the little table near the window. I opened my laptop and felt a rush of nerves, almost like I was 22 again, not 73. The first project was a grant proposal for a new mobile mental health unit targeting isolated seniors. I knew this world. I had written dozens of these. But something felt different this time. I wasn't doing it for a department. I was doing it for people like me. That week, I saw Olive again at the wellness center. She noticed the change right away. "You've got work face," she teased, pouring me a cup of tea. I smiled, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. I told her about the outreach unit, about the possibility of bringing care to seniors living on the edge of silence. She reached out and touched my hand. "That sounds like something the old you would have done." I thought about that phrase. The old me, the woman before the basement, before the check, before her daughter turned her into a burden. The truth was, that woman wasn't coming back, but maybe someone better was growing in her place. That night, back in my apartment, I sat down to finalize my draft, but the cursor blinked and blinked and blinked. My eyes drifted to the corner of the room. There, tucked behind my suitcase, was a folder I hadn't unpacked. It was full of letters. Handwritten notes from clients I had helped. Women who said they'd lived because of a workshop. Men who said they hadn't touched a bottle in 8 years. I read through them slowly, letting their words anchor me. Then I got back to typing. 2 days later, the draft was submitted. Cynthia called to say the director had been impressed. They wanted to pilot the unit within 3 months, and they wanted me to lead the community mapping. I accepted without hesitation. But that night, as I watered my plant and folded my laundry, I saw Mallory's name light up my phone screen. I didn't answer. She didn't leave a voicemail, just a text. "Can we talk soon?" I stared at it. The absence of punctuation, the lowercase letters. It felt casual, almost lazy, but I also knew Mallory. She never texted like this unless something was off. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't risk slipping back into old patterns. I needed to finish building something of my own before letting her voice back into my world. The next morning, I went to the centre early. Olive handed me a clipboard and said a local nursing home had asked for help designing a weekly group for their loneliest residents. I visited the facility that afternoon. The halls were too quiet. The air was heavy. An elderly woman named Marie reached out as I passed. "You knew?" I nodded. "Good. Maybe you'll listen." No one listens anymore. We talked for 15 minutes. She told me about a son who only called on Christmas, about how the silence on Sundays felt heavier than the walls. Her voice was thin, but it held a storm. When I left, I sat in the car and wept. Not just for Marie, but because I had become her, once. Later that week, Cynthia invited me to a planning meeting at City Hall. It felt surreal walking through those doors again, not as a retired employee, but as a guest. The younger staff looked at me like I was some kind of returning relic. But when I spoke, the room fell still. My voice hadn't changed, neither had my instincts. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's forgotten mother. I felt like a leader. Back home, I checked my phone again. Mallory had sent another message, saw the news about the grant. "Congrats. I guess you're busy." No anger, no warmth, just a sentence suspended in the cold air between us. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because I was building something that didn't need her approval. Not anymore. I had just stepped back from the food co-op with a bag of apples and a jar of honey when I saw her. Mallory. She was standing at the top of the stairs outside my building, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like a child waiting for the principal. Her eyes were sunken, no makeup, not even the usual press of her lips that made her seem untouchable. She looked small. She didn't speak at first, just watched me as I reached the step below her. Then, finally, her voice broke the air. "I thought I'd try showing up." I didn't answer. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. She followed. I didn't invite her in, but I didn't close the door either. My apartment was warm. The heater ticked softly. She sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight, like she was bracing for court. I let the silence stretch. I wanted to see how long she could hold it. Finally, she blurted it out. I didn't know how to ask for help without looking weak. That wasn't what I had expected. I tilted my head. She continued, her hands gripping her knees. "You always had this way of making things work. When I was young, if something broke, you fixed it. If we didn't have money, you found a way. I guess I thought you'd always just fix it, even when it wasn't fair." Her voice cracked on the word fair. I waited. "I need to sell the house, Mum. The renovations cost more than I thought. The payments, the taxes. I thought maybe if I just kept quiet, if I kept things organized, it'd work itself out." I took a slow breath. The weight in my chest returned, but it didn't crush me this time. I looked at her, really looked. Her hands, now twitching, her left eye red from lack of sleep. And yet, even in this moment, I could feel it, the calculation behind the vulnerability. I stood and walked to the kitchen, took out 2 mugs, poured hot water over peppermint tea. We sat across from each other again. "Why didn't you just tell me you didn't want me in the house?" I didn't raise my voice. It was a statement, a wound that had already bled dry. She flinched. "Because I didn't want you to see that I couldn't handle it, that I resented it, that I was ashamed." I nodded, that I believed. Then she looked up. "I miss you, Mum." My throat tightened. But missing me wasn't the same as respecting me, and I couldn't tell yet if she understood that. She pulled an envelope from her purse, placed it on the table. "I sold the Tesla, and I'm downsizing. This is for you." I opened it. A check. $17,000. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I didn't touch the check. I just looked at her and said, "I'm building something now. Something that doesn't depend on your roof or your pity." She swallowed hard. "I know." I stood. She did too. I walked her to the door. When she paused, I didn't stop her. When she reached for a hug, I gave her one. But when the door closed behind her, I stood in the quiet for a long time. I had waited so long for this moment. And it still didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarity, the kind that slices clean. I didn't know if she'd come back. I didn't know if I wanted her to. But I knew the next step was mine alone. I woke up the next morning before the sun. The apartment was still wrapped in that gentle silence I had come to love. I pulled the old flannel blanket over my shoulders, made tea, and sat near the window. There was a light fog over the lake, softening the lights from the street lamps like watercolor. I didn't think about Mallory, not immediately. My mind had grown used to the gap, like a missing tooth you learn to chew around. Instead, I thought about the blue wall, the one inside the old senior center on Jackson Street. A chipped, cracked wall that had been left untouched when the building was turned into a warehouse years ago. I remembered leaning against it with Rita Shaw in the spring of 1989, drinking our coffee and making a list on the back of a clinic flyer. Back then, we wanted to start a walking group for older women who were scared to go to the park alone. We thought it would last a season. It lasted 12 years. I opened my notebook and flipped past Mallory's name, past the check, past the groceries and receipts. And there it was, written in my own handwriting. Mental Health for Women, over 60. The title stared back at me like a dare. By the time the sun rose, I had already drafted 3 sections. I made calls that day. I reached out to former colleagues, to volunteers, to women I hadn't spoken to since before Harold passed. I told them about the idea. A simple weekly gathering, a quiet room, journals and peppermint tea. Conversations that were not about aches and medications, but about grief, about identity, about that echo that fills the house when no one says your name for days. A few days later, I went to the Jackson Street building. It was still empty. A for lease sign hung crooked in the window. The woman at the leasing office said it had been sitting vacant for almost 4 years. By the end of the week, I signed a 6-month lease. The room still had the old blue wall, faded and cracked, but it was there. I spent 2 full days cleaning it. I scrubbed until my knees ached and my palms went raw. I painted only the other walls, leaving the blue one untouched. It was a reminder of what had been, and what could still grow from what people thought was done. On opening day, 9 women showed up. Most walked slowly, cautiously. One of them brought her adult daughter who waited outside in the car. A few of them didn't speak much at all, but they stayed. We began by writing a word that described how we felt when we woke up that morning. Then we shared the word, if we wanted. We passed a basket of small stones. Each stone had a word written in ink. Strength, disappointment, waiting, silence. The women held the stones like prayers. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the middle of the room. I stared at the blue wall. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt present, and that was enough. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was from Mallory, a picture of her and Harold, taken the summer she turned 12. They were sitting on the porch swing. Her head rested on his shoulder. He looked alive in a way I had not remembered in years. There was no note, just the photo. I placed it in a frame on the desk in the Jackson Street room, not because I forgave her, but because memory has a right to exist, even when relationships don't. That evening, as I walked back to my apartment, I passed a young woman crying on the curb. I didn't stop. I didn't interfere. But when I got home, I wrote a new section in my binder. Intergenerational conversations. A future idea. It was beginning to unfold, not quickly, not loudly, but like the mist lifting from the lake. Quiet, steady, and wholly mine. It had been almost 3 weeks since I opened the doors to the Jackson Street room. By now, the routine had formed its own rhythm. I would arrive by 8. The kettle would be on by 8:15. The first few women would shuffle in by 8:30, their faces still half asleep, their eyes searching for a familiar nod. Each session felt different. Some days were quiet, heavy with unsaid things. Other days, laughter bounced off the walls, surprising even the women themselves. Most of them didn't know each other outside that room, yet they kept coming back. I never asked them why. I just made sure there was always a chair, always tea, and always quiet when it was needed. That morning, I was cleaning up after the last woman had left when I heard the chime of the front door. I turned around, expecting maybe Eleanor had forgotten her scarf again. But it wasn't Eleanor. It was Mallory. She stood in the doorway, a paper coffee cup in hand, and a tired look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not smugness, just tired. She stepped inside slowly, her heels making soft clicks against the wooden floor. She didn't say a word. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the chairs, the wall of journals, the blue paint I had refused to cover. I didn't move from where I stood. Mallory walked over to the desk and placed the coffee cup there, along with a small manila envelope. I could feel my heartbeat tighten in my throat. She looked down at the desk, then up at me. "I didn't know what this place was," she said, her voice flat. "Someone at work mentioned it, said their mum was coming here. I didn't put it together." I stayed silent. She took a deep breath and tapped the envelope. "There's something in there you should probably see. It's not about the money," she said. "It's about the house." Still, I said nothing. "I had them draft it up this week. It's the deed. I signed it over to you. The house. All of it. Your name. Only." I blinked once. My hands didn't move. "It's not because I want anything. It's because I finally read the will. Dad's original. The one before we changed anything." The words sat there, suspended in the air like a fog that refused to lift. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I shouldn't have taken the check. I knew it the second you gave it to me. But I thought maybe it would fix things." I didn't answer. She opened the door. Cold air slipped in around her. "Anyway, you still have the key." Then she left. I didn't touch the envelope until I locked up that night. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet, a notarized deed transfer, clean and simple. The house on Maple Street, now legally mine again. But what struck me most wasn't the document. It was the small note tucked inside. Not handwritten, typed. 3 lines. "I didn't know you could survive without us. I didn't know I needed you to." I stared at it for a long time. It didn't bring comfort. It didn't bring closure. But it cracked something open in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something smaller, like breath returning after a held silence. The next morning, I placed the envelope at the bottom of a drawer in the Jackson Street room. Then I opened the binder and wrote a new heading. Chapter 8, Ownership. And I meant every word. I didn't call Mallory, I didn't write back. But that night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I sat on the edge of my bed and turned on an old jazz record. One Harold used to play when we danced in the kitchen, years before the world got loud. I let it play all the way through. Then I got up, brushed my teeth, and slept through the night. It was almost noon when I received the email. I was in the middle of a quiet group session, pouring tea for Myrna, when my phone buzzed with that familiar vibration I hadn't felt in weeks. I ignored it, finished the hour, then walked back to my small office in the back of the Jackson Street room. There it was, sitting in my inbox. Subject line: regarding the Homeowners Association meeting. It was from Mallory. I opened it. The message was brief. The HOA wanted to vote on expanding shared costs for maintenance on our block. Mallory had sent them my email. My name was still listed under the property title now that she'd transferred it back to me. They were requesting my attendance and signature. I stared at the screen, not at the message, but at what it meant. Mallory had not only let go of the house, she had also let go of control over it. She had finally acknowledged something, even if she didn't say it aloud. Still, something in me tightened. That house had soaked up years of silent shame. Years of me saying yes when I meant no. Years of shrinking to keep the peace. It wasn't just about property. It was about history. And now it was mine to rewrite. I didn't reply to the email. I printed it out, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the same drawer where the deed now lived. Then I picked up the phone and made a call I had been rehearsing in my head for over a week. A lawyer picked up. I introduced myself, clearly and slowly, explained the property transfer, the background, the gift check, and what I wanted to do now. The woman on the line listened carefully. Then, in a calm voice, she said she understood completely. It took only 5 days to set it all up. On the 6th day, I invited Mallory to lunch. I told her to meet me at a small cafe near Lake Mendota. It was a crisp, bright day. She arrived a few minutes late, her coat draped over her arm and eyes squinting against the sunlight. She looked surprised to see I was already sitting inside, tea steaming in front of me. We made small talk, nothing deep. The weather, her work. She asked about the women's group. I gave simple answers. We both knew this wasn't really about catching up. When the server cleared the plates, I pulled an envelope from my purse and set it on the table between us. Mallory looked at it, but didn't touch it. "It's a trust," I said quietly, "for the house." Her brows lifted, but I kept going. The house is going to be turned into a transitional living space for women 50 and up. Women like Elaine, like Myrna, who lost everything in one moment: divorce, health collapse, family abandonment. That house will be a shelter, Mallory, not a punishment. She was quiet. Her lips tightened. "It's named after your grandmother," I added. Still, she said nothing. "I used the rest of the money your father left me to fund the conversion. The check I gave you, I don't want it back. Consider it the final chapter." Mallory's face went pale. Her shoulders dropped, as though a hidden burden had finally slid down. Not relief, not gratitude, just realization. I stood up, placed my coat over my arm, and paused beside her chair. "I won't be needing the downstairs anymore," I said. "Or any of it." Then I walked out. That evening I sat by the window in my apartment, overlooking the lake. A breeze moved gently across the surface, and the sun sank into gold. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. It had taken 73 years to say no without guilt, to give without being erased, to let go of a house that never quite felt like home and build one, instead, through kindness. The next day, I unlocked the Jackson Street room and found a note slipped under the door. It was from Elaine. She had gotten a part-time job teaching yoga at the community center. One line caught me. "You helped me feel human again." I folded it, smiled softly, and pinned it to the back wall. Right beneath the heading, Chapter 9, The Line I Drew. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my apartment as I poured the last bit of coffee into my chipped blue mug. Outside, the lake shimmered under early autumn light, its surface dotted with kayaks and the occasional duck slipping beneath the water. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to unsettle me. But now it felt like clarity. A knock sounded on the door. I opened it to find Marisol, one of the women from the local non-profit board, standing with a man in a neatly pressed blazer. His hands were full, a folder, a binder, and a small canvas bag with a community logo on it. He introduced himself as Parker. He worked with a regional coalition that funded grassroots housing projects for vulnerable populations. Marisol smiled, then gestured for permission to come in. We sat at the small dining table near the window. Parker opened the folder and spread out 2 documents. The first was a grant proposal draft. The second was a preliminary agreement of partnership. He explained they had heard about the conversion of my house, that someone on the board of the coalition had a cousin who'd stayed in a transitional shelter in Milwaukee. That word had spread, quietly but powerfully, about what I'd done. They were prepared to invest. His words came quickly, practiced. I heard the phrases he used: scaling potential, pilot expansion, long-term vision. The offer was generous: funding, staffing, and administrative help. All I needed to do was let them take over operations and branding. I held the paper in my hand. The numbers were impressive: over $200,000 in 2 phases, room for expansion into 3 more houses across Dane County. But my mind didn't stay on the money. It wandered back to Elaine, who had spent an entire afternoon scrubbing old tiles in what used to be my laundry room. It wandered back to Lena, who'd brought 2 donated quilts and insisted they belonged on the beds because women deserved beauty. It wandered to the small photo we'd pinned above the kitchen sink, an image of a tree blooming in spring, captioned with the words, "You're still growing." I folded the paper gently. "I'll read it over," I said calmly. Parker nodded, left his card, and they both excused themselves. After the door shut, I stood still in the center of the room. My hand was warm where the document had been. I knew opportunity when I saw it, and this was one. But I also knew something else. I hadn't created the Jackson Street house just to be a project. I had built it from pieces of my broken dignity, from silence that had once buried me, from the voices of women who had been told they were too old to matter, too inconvenient to listen to. I didn't need a bigger operation. I needed depth. 2 days later, I walked to the house, unlocked the door, and sat at the kitchen table with Myrna, who had just returned from a job interview at the library. She looked tired, but her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen before. I told her about the offer. Her expression darkened, not with jealousy, with worry. "That would change everything," she said slowly. I nodded. "Too fast," she added. "Too far." We didn't need to say more. I called Parker that evening, thanked him for the offer, told him I would not be moving forward. He paused, surprised, then accepted it with grace. That same night, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Thank you." It was from a woman named Judith. She had heard about the house from her church. She was 68, recently widowed, and living in her car. She had no one left. Her message was simple. She didn't ask for anything, just said the story gave her hope. I responded. And the next morning, Judith arrived at the house with a small suitcase and a red scarf tied tightly around her neck. She looked exhausted, unsure. But when Lena handed her a warm bowl of oatmeal and sat down beside her without asking questions, Judith's shoulders fell in relief. I knew then that I had made the right choice. The house was not a business. It was not a brand. It was a mirror, reflecting what it meant to still have something to give, even when the world said your best days were behind you. In that quiet kitchen, with the soft clinking of spoons and whispered conversation, I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride, not peace. Purpose. The weather had turned brisk. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk outside Jackson Street, curling in golden piles by the front steps. Inside, the smell of rosemary bread filled the house, thanks to Nora, who had taken it upon herself to bake once a week. I stood by the front window, mug in hand, watching the light move across the floorboards. My days had grown into a rhythm that I hadn't expected to love. There was meaning in the small things again, gathering vegetables from the shared garden out back, reading together in the living room as the sun dipped low, hearing the laughter of women who had once walked in, hunched with shame. Then, around mid-morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Mallory. She stood there with both hands clenched tight around her phone. Her hair was pinned back in a way I remembered from years ago, before everything shifted. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, then back to me. "I just wanted to see it," she said. I stepped aside. She didn't move at first. Then she walked in, slowly, her steps awkward on the old wooden floors. She looked around the living room, at the crocheted pillows and bookshelves lined with second-hand novels, at the row of tea mugs on the window ledge, at the couch, slightly sunken but always warm from someone's use. "You really live here," she said under her breath. I didn't respond. I just let her take it in. Elaine appeared from the hallway, smiled politely, then vanished into the kitchen. The quiet lingered. Mallory cleared her throat. "I read about it," she said. "Online. There's a post going around from one of the women. Someone mentioned your name. I didn't expect to see that." I nodded. She looked unsure, like she'd stepped into a story she thought she knew, only to realize it had rewritten itself without her. "I thought maybe," she began, then stopped. I waited. "I thought maybe you hated me," she said finally. I set down my mug. "Hating you would require more space than I have left to waste," I said gently. Mallory sat down on the edge of the couch. For a moment, she just stared at the floor. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I sold the house," she said. "The one you gave me money to fix. I needed to get out. It didn't feel like mine anymore." I didn't say anything. "I thought you'd be furious," she added. I wasn't. Something in me had already let it go, long before she stepped through that door. She stood up again, eyes still roaming the space. "I just didn't know you could be this version of yourself." I smiled, a little sad. "I didn't know either," I said. She nodded, then stepped toward the door. Just before she left, she turned back. "I'm staying in Middleton now," she said. "If you ever want to talk, or anything." I nodded once. "Take care of yourself." After she left, I stayed near the door for a while, listening, thinking. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel broken either. I felt neutral, like the edges of the wound had finally closed over, even if the scar would remain. That evening, the women gathered in the living room again. Lena brought popcorn, Myrna pulled out a deck of cards, and Judith turned up the radio slightly, letting jazz spill across the room. I sat by the window again, watching shadows stretch long across the floor. It occurred to me then that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It wasn't something you gave or received like a wrapped package. It was a quiet decision you made over and over, each time choosing to live forward instead of back. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel erased. I felt present, whole. Here. The late summer sun draped itself across the porch rail, warming the planks beneath my bare feet. A breeze came in through the screen door, carrying the sound of laughter from the backyard. The women had gathered early this morning to prepare for what we now called our Sundays of Self. Just a few hours set aside each week for each other, and for ourselves. It started as a simple idea, a journal circle, a walk by the lake. But something kept growing, just like that little garden we once doubted could survive the spring frost. People donated books. Someone dropped off yoga mats. A local nurse came in to teach us about blood pressure, breath work, and boundaries. Even the barista at the corner cafe sent over her leftover muffins now. I sat on the porch swing with a stack of notes in my lap. Stories from the women. Letters written but never sent. Dreams once locked in drawers, now scribbled in ballpoint pen and coloured pencil. I had begun collecting them. Quiet declarations of worth. Proof that healing was not only possible, it was happening, right here, in real time. Inside the house, Elaine was rearranging chairs again. She had a habit of moving things just a few inches at a time, always searching for better light, better balance. I found that charming now. Judith was tuning the old radio. Myrna was watering the basil. Each woman, once fractured in her own way, now fit like a note in a song we hadn't known we were writing. I thought back to the version of me that first walked through this house. Fragile, humiliated, carrying shame that did not belong to me. I had folded myself so small then, trying to make room in other people's lives, hoping they would let me stay. Now I had room, and more than that, I had roots. Mallory had not returned after that visit. She sent a short message a week later. No grand apology, no justifications, just a note saying she was safe and she was thinking of me. That was enough. I did not need more than that. Sometimes, letting go meant refusing to chase an ending that would never come. Sometimes it meant choosing peace over closure. The porch swing creaked as I leaned back. Across the yard, a new woman arrived. Grey hair tucked beneath a straw hat, hands fiddling nervously with her scarf. Elaine walked toward her slowly. No pressure, no expectations. I smiled. Another story had just walked through the gate. And maybe that was the point all along. That somewhere beyond disappointment and betrayal, beyond hurt and humiliation, there could still be something worth building. A space of our own. A garden. A swing. A breath of morning air. No revenge. No final word. Just quiet dignity. Just life. Still moving forward. Still blooming. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own home, or silenced inside your own family, this story was for you. You are not invisible. You are not replaceable. And it's never too late to plant something new in your own life. If this touched you, I hope you take a moment to share what you're reclaiming for yourself today. Your story matters, too.